Welcome to Mastering MHA MBA. In this video, we cover the foundations of process costing, what it is, when it applies, and the 5-step framework you will be tested on. This is part 1 of a 3-part series on Chapter 5 from Datar and Rajan, Managerial Accounting. Today, we focus on the foundations. When process costing applies, the difference between physical units and equivalent units, and the 5-step framework. Parts 2 and 3 will cover weighted average versus FIFO and joint and common cost allocation. By the end of this video, you will be able to identify when process costing is the right tool, compute average unit costs, and apply the 5 steps of process costing, including the equivalent units calculation. Imagine a hospital lab running 10,000 complete blood count tests in a single month. Every test uses the same reagents, the same machine, and roughly the same technician time. The CFO needs to know the cost per test for the charge master, for managed care contract negotiation, and for budget variance reports. You cannot track each tube as a separate job. This is exactly where process costing earns its keep. Costing systems sit on a continuum. On the left, job costing, where each unit is unique and you trace costs to the specific job. Think custom surgical instruments or a one-off consulting engagement. On the right, process costing, where units are identical or near identical and you average costs across thousands of them. Most real businesses fall somewhere in between, but the two ends define the playbook. Pharmaceutical batches, gasoline refining, soft drink bottling, and check processing at a bank. In healthcare, lab tests, dialysis sessions, claims processing, and pharmacy compounding of standard formulations. Anywhere units are identical and produced in volume, process costing is the right system. Start with the simplest case. A company starts and finishes every unit inside the accounting period. No partially complete units at the start or end of the month. This is common in services. A bank closes its books with 0 half-processed deposits because each deposit clears in seconds. When there is no work in process, the math is straightforward. Cost per unit equals total costs incurred divided by total units produced. That is it. The full power of process costing collapses to one division when nothing is left in flight. Here is a textbook example. The assembly line starts and finishes 400 units in January. Direct materials cost $32,000. Conversion costs, which include labor, energy, and depreciation, total $24,000. Direct material cost per unit is $80. Conversion cost per unit is $60. Total cost per unit is $140. Clean and simple. A bank processing 100,000 customer deposits in a month uses this exact approach. Each deposit takes the same processing path, so total processing cost divided by deposits gives you cost per deposit. The same logic powers cost per claim at a payer, cost per imaging study at an outpatient center, cost per tax return at a CPA firm. February gets harder. The company starts 400 units, but only 175 are finished by month end. The other 225 are stuck on the line, partially complete. Now you cannot just divide. A unit that is 60% done absorbed real costs but is not a finished good. You need a way to compare apples to apples. Here is the trick. If 50 units are 70% complete, the labor and overhead poured into them could have produced 35 fully complete units instead. Those 35 units are called equivalent units. It is a way of saying the work I did equals this much finished output. Equivalent units are a derived measure of output that converts the work done on partial units into the equivalent number of fully completed units. You calculate them separately for each input because direct materials and conversion costs usually flow into the process at different times. In most processes, direct materials are added at the very start. The moment a unit enters the line, it has 100% of its material content, even if it is only half assembled. Conversion costs, which include labor and overhead, are added evenly through the process. So a half-assembled unit is 100% complete on materials, but only 50% complete on conversion. You will see this assumption baked into almost every exam problem. Now the framework. Step 1. Summarize the flow of physical units. Step 2. Compute output in equivalent units. Step 3. Summarize total costs to account for. Step 4. Compute cost per equivalent unit. Step 5. Assign total cost to units completed and units still in process. Memorize this sequence. Every process costing problem on every exam follows it. Step 1 is bookkeeping. Where did the units come from? Where did they go? February, 0 in beginning inventory, 400 started. That is 400 to account for. Of those, 175 finished and transferred out, 225 ended in work in process. The two sides must equal. Step 2 is where most students slip. Compute equivalent units separately for materials and conversion. The 175 completed units count as 175 equivalent units for both inputs. The 225 in ending work in process are 100% complete on materials, so that is another 225 equivalent units of materials, but they are only 60% complete on conversion, so that is 135 equivalent units of conversion. Totals 400 equivalent units of materials, 310 equivalent units of conversion. Step 3. Add up every dollar that hit the work in process account. February, 32,000 of materials plus 18,600 of conversion. Total of 50,600. That is the pool of cost we have to allocate. Step 4. Cost per equivalent unit equals total cost for that input divided by equivalent units for that input. Materials, 32,000 divided by 400 equivalent units, $80 per unit. Conversion, 18,600 divided by 310 equivalent units, $60 per unit. Notice the $60 is the same as January, even though total conversion spend dropped. The equivalent units adjustment caught it. Step 5. Cost out the two buckets. The 175 completed units carry 175 equivalent units times $80 of materials plus 175 equivalent units times $60 of conversion. That is 24,500. The 225 partial units carry 225 equivalent units times $80 of materials plus 135 equivalent units times $60 of conversion. That is 26,100. The two add to 50,600. Step 3 matches Step 5. The system balances. One ethical warning every MHA and MBA student should know. The degree of completion estimate is judgment, not measurement. A supervisor who overstates completion shifts cost out of inventory and into cost of goods sold, lowering this period's income. Understating completion does the reverse and smooths earnings. Auditors and CMA exam writers love this gotcha. Always ask how the estimate was made. On the CMA exam, expect a multi-part problem that asks for equivalent units, cost per equivalent unit, and assignment of costs in a single question. Practice computing materials and conversion separately. Watch for the trap where materials are 100% complete but conversion is partial. That is the most tested setup in the field. In modern hospital finance, equivalent units logic powers the unit cost of imaging studies, infusion sessions, and surgical minutes. In an era of price transparency rules and value-based contracting, knowing your true cost per service line is a board-level concern, not a back-office one. Automation tools now pull labor minutes and supply consumption directly from the EHR, but the framework you just learned is what those tools are calculating under the hood. Quick recap. Process costing fits identical units in volume. Equivalent units convert partial work into full unit equivalents, separately for materials and conversion. The 5 steps walk you from physical flow to cost assignment. In part 2, we open up the harder case, beginning work in process, plus the choice between weighted average and FIFO methods. If this helped, subscribe to Mastering MHA MBA for the rest of the series. Part 2 drops next. Source for this chapter: Datar and Rajan, Managerial Accounting, Pearson.